This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this is our 2019 NBA Finals preview. It only took 10 games for us to figure out that there seems to be a possible Western reunited rivalry, that of which Kawhi Leonard has one opportunity to take down a dynasty. If people recall, a couple of years ago, 2017, Kawhi Leonard had a chance to open up the conversation of whether or not the Golden State Warriors have ushered into a new era of dominance with Kevin Durant, and then the fatal injury by his ankle through Zaza Pachulia took that away from us. Now, 2 years later, Kawhi Leonard has found a new way to see if he can reopen that argument in taking down a dynasty. The Cyborg, the Terminator, with the Toronto Raptors, looking to take out the Golden State Warriors in a massive, epic battle for the NBA Finals. And I cannot wait to break it down, give you all the goodies from both perspectives. And to do that, let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. I know you wouldn't have been disappointed too much whether it had been the Milwaukee Bucks or whether it had been the Toronto Raptors. But the fact that we have the Raptors makes for pretty good NBA Finals discussions, my man.
Couldn't have said it better myself, my dude. Really and truly, this NBA Finals that we're going to have before us was set to be a great one regardless, because there's some new blood going against the Golden State Warriors. So whether it was the Toronto Raptors and the Milwaukee Bucks, I think I was going to be excited. But the fact that it is Toronto, they get to exercise so many demons, by advancing and now getting to the NBA Finals, playing a chance for the chip. Kawhi, as you alluded to as well, too, maybe get to exercise some demons against the Golden State Warriors when they injured him, on his San Antonio team a couple years ago as well. This is just a lot of things happening as a result of the Raptors making the NBA Finals and stuff that we'll talk about much, much, much further down the line. But the fact that they're even here is probably changing the landscape of the NBA as we think about it right now, even whether they win or lose. So great matchup, and great for the country, the nation of Canada, to finally get this thing done here and get a chance now to take home the Larry O'Brien Trophy against Golden State.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there are so many different topics that we can explore because of the dynamic of what's transpired at this point. Let's just say this from a poker perspective. The stakes have been raised. The big blinds have been upped. The small blinds have been upped. And I think that it's going to have us, really forge our way of thinking. We have to be more forward thinking about the way that we're looking at not only the dynamics of the players that may be involved for this upcoming offseason, but the teams that are being involved as well, too. And maybe in some way that raises the altitude of how this game can really be looked at. This series, can really be looked at. And I think, one thing that has to be maintained throughout all of this, Shaw, is that we're seeing two really, really good teams who have had to overcome circumstances within the course of the playoffs to get to this point. So let's not let that be overlooked. We don't need to go all the way back at the beginning in the off seasons and everything. Just look at what the Raptors have done to put themselves in this position to be competing for an NBA championship. And let's look at what the Golden State Warriors have done to compete and put themselves in a position to be a three-time defending NBA champion, right? So if you look at the if you look at the Toronto Raptors, the fact that they had to go through the Orlando Magic, the fact that they had to get through the Philadelphia 76ers and and eventually the Milwaukee Bucks, none of these three teams are chopped liver. Each of them proposes a different dynamic and a different matchup situation that had us questioning the roster that Nick Nurse was basically using in order to counter what they were playing against, right? And then obviously on the other side, when we talk about the Golden State Warriors, they were able to have their full team without DeMarcus Cousins. Very questionable from the bench because you saw that Steve Kerr relied more heavily on his starters. And then the moment that Kevin Durant goes down, Steve Kerr makes the adjustment. Again, something that other teams seem to lack in doing when playing against the Golden State Warriors for whatever reason. The moment Steve Kerr makes his adjustments and implements certain strategies, we see the greatness of the Golden State Warriors, and why I think at times we tend to miss out on the idea that because they look like a superpower, they suddenly now are being recognized for why each individual player with their unique skill sets brings such a dominant perspective in how they play the game of basketball. And these two get to clash in a possible 7-game series or however long this is for us to really be able to meet the minds and talk about it.
I think you're going to have two unique coaching styles here, and two teams that, for lack of a better phrase, have been running on different course and parallels for a little while. Obviously, the champions and the Golden State, and the forgotten in some ways with the Toronto Raptors and the chances that they've taken. And now, again, with the coaching styles, I think Nurse and Steve Kerr. Nurse is willing to make adjustments. Kerr was forced to make adjustments, but all those adjustments have worked out for both of them, as you see as they meet here now as a clash in the NBA Finals. And I'm very interested to see what these two coaches do throughout the course of the series. There's conversations if and when KD comes back, if and when Cousins comes back. What does Kerr do? The team is humming kind of now without them, but you brought those guys here to help you win the championship. So it's an interesting parallel that I think, or not parallel, but an interesting problem that Kerr will have to face later on in the series, or maybe not. Maybe not. But then what does that end up meaning? What, depending on how the series goes as well too. The biggest thing that I can say before we get into the crux of the preview is that I really do believe in Toronto's ability to overcome adversity. And sometimes, while I very much thought Milwaukee was going to be the team of destiny this year and probably had the best chance to upset Golden State, Toronto has shown and proven to me that they cannot be discounted. So many demons have been exercised as a result of this playoff run that they have truly gained my respect. Their bench has come back to life, especially Fred VanVleet. Norman Powell coming off the bench now. And I remember you even calling for him to get some more minutes earlier on in the playoffs, when they were struggling against Philadelphia. And Nurse has made some of those adjustments to make it happen. So, again, I think this is going to be a great series no matter what the outcome is. And I hope not just the NBA fans, true NBA fans, but I hope all fans tune in because the Raptors deserve your respect, and they deserve to be watched and to be seen, as a team of the present and potentially the future, especially if they can do the unthinkable in beating the Golden State Warriors.
And of course, we want to see more Drake massaging. Listen, I think this may be the next capital venture for Drake, opening up, personal massages for head coaches, not only on his team, but on your opposing teams. You come to Toronto, you come to the Six, you know what I'm saying? Not only do you immerse yourself in a great culture, Canadian culture, but you get great massages from celebrities. I think that would work, right? I think that would play for me. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just listen, I digest. Listen, let's get right into it, man. Let's not waste any time. Let's really talk about this. So you brought up an excellent point when we talk about the Toronto Raptors. They have proven that they know how to overcome adversity. Okay. And it reminds me, because the counter argument I can make to you is the Golden State Warriors have proven that they are a team that can overcome adversity. 3 games straight, they were in double-digit deficits against the Portland Trailblazers, and they do what they do best: win the third quarter. And it's interesting because part of the conversation that we try to have about teams, and you and I do this all the time, Shaw, you win the third quarter, you should be favored going into the fourth, even if you are still behind against the opposition, because the momentum is certainly on your side, okay? There has been no team that I can think of in this 5-year span that has proven that perception quite true than the Golden State Warriors. They are the master that you can go in suffering a 20-point, 18-point deficit at halftime, come out the gates and take that deficit and cut it down to 10, cut it down to 13, where for other teams going into the fourth quarter, that would still be a problem. It would still look like, you know what, the head coach might as well just start rolling out the bench players, start thinking about the next game, or start thinking about the next team that they're going to play on their road trip or whatever. Not Steve Kerr. Every deficit that the Golden State Warriors seems to be in is nothing but more than an opening to really show the greatness of how this team can be so explosive. And it's so interesting because the other dynamic with the Toronto Raptors is they are a team where even if you look at the stat sheets and they lost that third quarter, it's all about what they did 5 minutes going down to the end of the quarter. If the Toronto Raptors are quickly are just chipping and chipping and chipping away at the lead, and then suddenly what you had is a 15-point lead now down to a 5-point lead by the time the fourth quarter ends, and you have the cyborg on your side, that to me spells a lot of trouble, because now you really see the tension and the apprehension from the opposition of whether or not they can close the deal. And that to me makes for exciting basketball. Even if you don't buy into the first half, the second half is where it really gets good.
Well, I'll say this, going into this series, I think with Golden State, you always have to be cautious, as you alluded to. So Toronto can be up at any point and never feel comfortable. You could have a 20-point lead, a 25-point lead. Unless it's the final 2 minutes of the game, I would not be comfortable against Golden State because of their ability to score quickly, score in bunches. You reel off 12 points in a minute and 30 seconds. Just can come out there and bang 4 threes, create 2 turnovers. There's not a team in the NBA that I've seen in recent years that thrives off of momentum in the same way Golden State does. It's a palpable and intangible thing that we all watch, and we see it when it happens. We see a big turnover, a dunk, a three, whatever it is. We see when that shift starts to happen. But no team rides that wave better than Golden State because of their prolific ability to score and then to lock you down on defensively, especially with Draymond playing the way that he's been playing in the latter part of these playoffs right now. Klay Thompson and what he's been doing as well. They get out there, they get into, then they're forcing transition. They're shooting threes every now and then. Maybe somebody will dunk too, especially if Durant is out there. But they can scare the hell out of you and come back into games very, very quickly. On the flip side, though, Toronto, I think, has shown the ability, especially in the series versus Milwaukee, to get down and then be able to come back themselves. So I don't know what's better for them. You feel like in some instances, because Golden State has a tendency sometimes to get lazy, especially if they're the ones who are up and they can sometimes let you back into games. But I think if it's Toronto, you probably want to be playing maybe as even as possible. And I know that sounds crazy. You don't want to have a big lead, but I think there's a more sense of like you're staying engaged if the game is somewhat close, so to speak. Within maybe an 8 to 10 point range, so to speak, if you will. And that way, you can continue to stay engaged. You don't let up. This Golden State team can come back at any point, and those are the ebbs and flows that I'll be looking to see kind of throughout the course of the series when it comes to Toronto. Again, of course, Golden State could go out here and blow them out in all the games, and nobody be surprised. I think the biggest surprise if Toronto wins any game by more than 10 to 15 points, I think a lot of people would be shocked by that. Although I don't see that a lot of people are writing Toronto completely off. No one's really picking them to win the series as of yet. And there's a lot of things that have to go right for them, including the play of guys like Danny Green, who he's going to get minutes in this series, and especially because of the size and the length that they need to be able to throw out against some of the Golden State offensive players. He's got to be on the other side hitting shots as well too. So there's a lot of key factors for the Toronto Raptors outside of Kawhi if they want to make the series competitive.
You bring up so many great points. So I'm going to try and keep what I'm going to say in line with where you're going, but continue to move the conversation forward. So you bring up Danny Green, okay? Danny Green in this series played 146 minutes. He gave you 3 points, 3 rebounds, and 1.5 steals. Maybe that's the only particular statistic that stands out. Dude, he shot 17% from 3. Okay? I'm going to keep this 100. Unless Danny Green figures out a way to lock down Steph Curry and Klay Thompson, who Klay Thompson, by the way, averaged almost 22 points per game in that series against the Trailblazers, right? Unless Danny Green figures out a way to minimize either one of these guys from shooting basically 38% from 3 between the both of them, there is no reason for him to be on that basketball court. And I'm not trying to sound disrespectful to Danny Green. I'm just thinking about the dynamic of whether or not, and I hate to say this because with Danny Green, this is not a question of whether or not the Toronto Raptors are going to score 120 points. That isn't what's going to happen if this is the kind of productivity you're getting from him. But if he's going to occupy this many minutes, you are basically saying you're keeping him out there to stop other shooters for the Golden State Warriors. So if he's incapable of doing that, Nick Nurse can't afford to just keep him leaving him out there, leaving him out there. This can't be a 4-on-5 situation, knowing that, oh, well, I have Kawhi Leonard, and as the cyborg, he can basically even it out. That's not going to fly. Because the other key factor in this, Shaw, is Draymond Green. The way that the Golden State Warriors can attack you from the half court is also not by saying that the primary ball handler is going to be Steph Curry. It can very well be Draymond Green. And if you are Pascal Siakam, if you are Kawhi Leonard, if Draymond Green plays the 5 primarily, you can't have Marc Gasol on Draymond Green. He will tear him up from the half court down. They have to get points from whoever is on the basketball court. And if not, they are making the decision that this is going to be a defensive game and that they're going to limit the amount of shots that the Golden State Warriors will have at their disposal for them to win these type of games.
Well, as you said, a lot of great points and a lot of things we can dive into there. So we can start with Danny Green and what he means to them defensively. I think just for the ability that he can at least try to stay with and put length on Curry. As Lowry will probably be chasing around some other guys as well too. But whether you put on Green on Curry, whether you put Green on Clay, whether you put Green on KD, if and when he comes back as well too. What Toronto did majority of the Milwaukee series is Kawhi did not play straight up against the other team's best player in the first 2 games. Well, that resulted in losses. So do you now then, try that same strategy again and say, all right, because Golden State has so many weapons, he's going to have to guard somebody regardless. Do you put Kawhi on Iguodala if he's back and let him, quote unquote, try to rest a little bit, on the defensive side, or do you go right out there and put him on Clay? Again, if KD's out there, then that's, again, that probably won't be till game 3 or 4 at the earliest. But those are some of the things that they have to be concerned about. Your point about Gasol, though, to me is interesting because Gasol has, depending on how deeply you believe into these stats, but the highest plus and minus of any Raptor in the course of the playoffs, to date right now. But you're right, he might be unplayable in the series if the Golden State Warriors decide to go small and put Draymond at 5 the majority of the time. And I think that is something you will definitely see as Kurt is going to look at these numbers and see what Gasol has been doing, especially defensively clogging the paint. And they may want to try to take advantage of that matchup, which would negate him and force Ibaka to play some more minutes. So again, this is where it comes down to the coaching strategies, the rotations, the adjustments that need to take place throughout the course of the series. And I think we're going to get a lot of that from the outset in game 1. Or does Nick Nurse say, you know what, forget it, we're going to start Ibaka immediately, although in all 18 games Gasol has started, despite his high plus-minus ratio thus far in the playoffs. And these are the things I think defensively that you really have to be concerned about if you're Toronto. The greatest part of this matchup, or one of the greatest things about this matchup, is in the playoffs, this is the best offensive team versus the best defensive team, with Toronto being defense and Golden State being offensively inclined right now, highest scorings, if you will, and lowest scoring against with Toronto. And then you look at the supplemental parts, as you alluded to, and I shouldn't say supplemental because Siakam's obviously had a great year, but who does he match up with? Especially if they are running small, with Ibaka out there. Well, who does Siakam then guard? Because you just presumably think Ibaka is going to be on Draymond. So Siakam now on, some sort of a small forward, playing power forward situation in Golden State. I want to know, and I don't know exactly how everything's going to go. We have so much time in between now when the finals actually start. But there are a lot of options rotation-wise that I think both teams want to feel like they can take advantage of. The one thing I'll say, before I move on to as well, is that I am concerned about Gasol's ability to be an offensive weapon in the series, because even if they decide, all right, bump it, we're going to throw him out there and Draymond's playing 5, what confidence do you have that Gasol's not going to be able to and take Draymond in the post, so to speak? So Gasol becomes kind of like, a pick and pop type guy, elbows, maybe even the wings and the corners for 3, where he's trying to space Draymond out. And you'll see if Draymond will be like, you know what, go ahead and shoot that thing and see if you can make it. So a lot of things for Toronto to consider offensively and defensively.
All right, so many things to unpack here. But listen, to add on to your point, when it comes to Marc Gasol, in this series against the Milwaukee Bucks, Marc Gasol scored 51 points. Okay? Of the 51 points, 36 of them were off the 3. So he basically hit 12 threes in this series. Okay? So that's a problem to me. The reason why I say it's a problem to me is because if you're playing in this half court oriented set, what you're telling me is that Marc Gasol is going to be camping out behind the arc most of the time. If the Warriors are playing small, and given the fact that we have seen through the course of this playoff run for the Toronto Raptors, how often have we seen Marc Gasol establish post presence? Where exactly is the post presence for the Toronto Raptors if you have a Siakam and you have a Gasol? A lot of them have been top of the key, dribble down, penetration, or coming off of picks from Kawhi Leonard, leaving space, right? So my problem with the Toronto Raptors right now, and this is going to be very key, because if the Golden State Warriors do get back Andre Iguodala for the beginning of this series, the Warriors don't have to commit to having a legitimate big to play Marc Gasol, because there's nothing about Marc Gasol's game throughout this whole playoff run that says that he will stay dedicated to punishing those in the paint. And that may cause problems in a half court oriented offense. That means that you are not going to take advantage of those matchups that the Warriors at times will give you, because they want to enforce their will to run up and down the court. They want to be the transition oriented offensive system through Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr, knowing this, will compromise that if he sees that the Raptors big don't commit in the paint and don't punish the Warriors bigs. And then we haven't even talked about the fact that if Steve Kerr does get DeMarcus Cousins for spot minutes, he can extend DeMarcus Cousins possibly simply because Marc Gasol is not an active big like other bigs that they faced throughout the course of their run in the Western Conference.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying there. I think for Toronto, the biggest post presence they have is actually Kawhi. You know, when he tries to
and not
take
saying
some of the
something because they
guards
still have
or
Serge
wing
Ibaka
players.
on the bench, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, Ibaka he's a jump shooter at this stage of his career, a jump shooter and a rebound cleanup type of garbage man in that regard. So you're not going to run straight post ups for Ibaka, you know, unless Gasol has Klay Thompson or Curry on him on a switch, you're not running straight post ups for Gasol either. But I mean, those are matchups they can at least try to take advantage of, maybe here and there. And like I said in the previous series, it's not something that you're going to run extensively and say this is our offense. You know where your bread is buttered at. But I think there are some matchups there where you try some of those things here and there. But Kawhi is the post offense for Toronto right now if they're looking to do anything in that realm, so to speak. But I think one major key to this series is something that we were concerned about Toronto going into the Milwaukee series was, all right, where do all the points come from? Lowry played great, Siakam played pretty well as well too, kind of throughout, and then they got spot minutes. Van Vliet got fire, you know, the latter part of the series as well. But I think where Toronto has to win this series is they have to win the battle on the glass, especially offensive rebounds. They have got to get some second chance points because we know Golden State's defense, their primary defense is going to be very good kind of throughout the course of the series. And as again, we know Toronto's defense is good. But I think where Toronto has an opportunity is if they stay active, and that's where Lowry's ability to come in here and crash the glass, you know, getting 5 rebounds a game so far in the playoffs, you know, Siakam, his ability to rebound, and Kawhi, when he's put his mind to it, you know, 17 rebounds and all those things, they have to get second chance point. They have to be active and making sure Golden State's defense is scrambling. So I don't think their Toronto's offense will beat them a lot on first opportunity possessions, but on those second chance points, Toronto can really make their name, especially if Cousins and Durant and people like that aren't into to start the series, so to speak. Golden State is a little bit weak defensively when it comes to rebounding the basketball rather, and that's where Kevon Looney and guys like that will come into play as well too. But I think Toronto has a distinct advantage if they can stay active on that side of the basketball.
All right, so I want us to talk about the Splash Brothers. Oh, excuse me, brothers. I want to talk about the Splash Brothers, right? Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. All right. They have obviously proven that they collectively, along with Draymond Green, have taken a step back and have conceded to allowing Kevin Durant to be the Kevin Durant that we've seen over the last couple of years, right? And willingly so. They embody the concept of playing as a team, because now we recognize the kind of sacrifices they have made, because we've seen what happens when Steve Kerr can say, hey, let's just unleash what we know is tried and true about what's made the Warriors the Warriors. How effective can you see Steph Curry and Klay Thompson in this series as it relates to the previous finals that these guys have been through? Because we've often questioned Steph Curry stepping up in key moments, and he's been there, right? He is definitely has made some big shots. He's been an anchor. When where we've seen situations where Klay Thompson has set the tone when this team has fallen behind to offensively keep them in games, and Steph Curry has managed a way to take them home. How effective do you see them being able to do that with this type of team now? Because it is somewhat of a different dynamic. This isn't going to be offense versus offense, like they dealt with the Blazers. This is going to be Kyle Lowry and Kawhi Leonard against the Splash Brothers. And this is something I don't think that they've dealt with even in the 5-year span of their run to winning these championships that they've gotten.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because of the potential cross matches that Nick Nurse will throw at them defensively. Curry and Clay are historically great. We already know that, and no defense is probably going to shut them down completely. But I think, especially in the first couple of games without KD, that is probably where you do try maybe some Kawhi on Curry and spot minutes. Kyle Lowry is a physical defender, and he can try to hold his own, but you just feel like, okay, there's probably more opportunity for him to get beat on that side of the basketball. But I think if there's some switches here, like isolation plays where Kawhi is on him, then that can maybe throw Curry out of rhythm. I think you take your chances with Clay, and I know that's not something you want to do. You have to stay attached. You don't want to let Clay out there shooting threes, but if you close out on him, I think you much rather have Clay beating you in the mid range or trying to beat you off the dribble where he's not tremendously successful than you want him shooting threes or Curry doing whatever Curry wants to do, I think, in the interim time. And that's where it comes down to the other guys, because if Iguodala's out there hitting shots, if Draymond's out there hitting shots, kind of tip your cap and say, all right, let it be. But you got to go out there and try to dismantle and disrupt what the Splash Brothers want to do, and wishes they can do a lot of things. But I think Curry is obviously the head of that snake. Clay's a little bit more limited, offensively. So I think you can put your lesser defender on him in some ways, as long as you know that you got to stay attached and you want to try to mix it up against Curry, saying, with guys his size, guys that are bigger or longer than him as well too, giving him some different looks and not allowing him to get off and really be the catalyst for the Golden State Warriors throughout. But those two guys are going to be a handful no matter who's guarding.
All right, I want to do something a little bit different. We didn't do this in our previous previews throughout the course of the NBA playoffs. I know that what we normally do is we do X factors, right? We'll do who's the X factor for for the Warriors, who's the X factor for the Toronto Raptors. But I want to do something a little bit different here because I think this warrants, when we talk about the finals, really getting into the nuances of not just one element or one particular player. So I want to do an offensive X factor and a defensive X factor for each of these. So I want to start with, who do you see as being your defensive X factor for the Toronto Raptors and your defensive X factor for the Golden State Warriors?
Well, I mean, in some ways, it's going to depend on what what the factor is, like what tangibles are they bringing to it. There's guys who I think inherently need to play well defensively for Toronto, to make the series competitive throughout. But I think in some ways it's going to be the defensive X factor. I think for them might be actually Van Vliet, because offensively you feel like he's going to be productive, but it's one of those and it's Cantor situations. Is what he's giving you offensively enough to keep him out there because he's not producing defensively? So obviously he can only match up against the point guards of Golden State really and be effective, but he cannot and very very likely would get torched against Stephen Curry. So I think defensively, I'm looking to see that Van Vliet can at least hold his own, or just not just get obliterated by whatever matchup or whatever switches end up happening with him out there. And I know it's kind of a wonky way to think about it, so to speak, but that's what I'm looking at, because I think he's found his groove offensively now. He's got to make sure that he's able to contribute something defensively, and you could be a good team defender even if you're not a great individual one. For Golden State, I think it's still going to be about some of their core guys specifically, and if Iguodala is back and can play kind of throughout the course of the series, his just ability to switch onto Kawhi, his ability to maybe even to try to disrupt Lowry if Kawhi is resting. Who knows? You might even see Iguodala on Siakam at times as well too. You're never really too sure kind of what that's going to be. So I think it's a little bit of a cop out, so to speak. But I'm looking at Iguodala's availability and his switchability to play defense for Golden State to kind of be the disrupting factor for what they do, along with guys like Draymond Green, of course, as well too. But that's what I'm looking at from a defensive standpoint.
All right. So really quick for me, I think Pascal Siakam is going to be my defensive X factor. In the series against the Milwaukee Bucks, he had gotten 7 steals and 6 blocks. He, to me, there has to be a companion, a defensive companion for Kawhi Leonard, to offset the responsibilities that he's going to wind up taking on as they continue through, the course of a game or a series against the Golden State Warriors. I don't know if you can have those same expectations for Marc Gasol or for Kyle Lowry, but I can see that with Pascal Siakam. And look, he has the 3rd most minutes on the team, so he's going to have to be on the floor. He is the 2nd best offensive player, but I think practically for him, his best offense will be his defense and the way that he helps to establish turnover opportunities for the Toronto Raptors. Now, on the flip side, I know that this sounds crazy, Shaw, and I know that people are going to probably be jumping on top of of their roof talking about what the hell is this boy talking about. But I honestly believe that Steph Curry is going to be the defensive X factor for the Golden State Warriors. And let me tell you why. If Steph Curry can prove that he can stymie, right? Frustrate Kyle Lowry, upset the passing lanes for Kawhi Leonard from the backcourt perspective, where they start and penetrate. If he can establish himself, defensive rebounds, nullifying offensive rebound opportunities, closing out on some 3-point plays that they're going to try and establish for maybe Van Fleet, for maybe Kyle Lowry, for maybe Danny Green. That to me is going to be critical. Curry's closeouts and Curry's ability to stay in front. And I think that he has shown that he can do that. You know what I'm saying? When he is invested in that, I've seen that he can do that. He doesn't have to, play at the level that Klay Thompson is playing. But I really believe that if Steve Kerr has the spoil and luxury of Klay Thompson manning up one-on-one with Kawhi Leonard, and most situations aren't switch outs, it's mainly Draymond Green. Even at the expense of some opportunities that Steph Curry has to play up in front of Kawhi's on those switches, Steph Curry can allow the rest of the Golden State Warriors to do the things that they will do to create those transition offensive opportunities for them. And I think that the Raptors will give Steph Curry opportunities to disrupt and get steals. He just needs to recognize and take advantage of that. And then I also think that the big factor too is not turning the ball over, right? To me, that's more of an offensive error, but I think it plays defensively, because if the Golden State Warriors are the best team in transition, the only way that they kill their own momentum is when they recklessly turn the ball over and allow the Raptors to get open out on transition. So by that, I look at that as those dynamics as to saying I see Steph Curry being the defensive X factor. Let's talk about the offensive X factor. Who do you have for Toronto? Who do you have for Golden State?
Well, let me just comment real quick on kind of what you said. I mean,
knew you were
Siakam
gonna do it. I
defensively.
knew you were gonna do it. Go ahead.
No, Siakam is, again, he's basically the Swiss Army knife, I think, for Toronto that Iguodala is for Golden State. So his value, and he's proven it, and his ability to switch, and if he does get a steal and to be able to create transition and run offense himself, sometimes I think is a big factor for what Toronto wants to do ultimately. And then our guy Nikias Duncan, who we had on earlier, he sent out a tweet at some point during the series. It's like, listen, how good is your defense if Steph Curry is your worst defender? And I think Curry, because of his size, slider frame, things of that nature, he gets picked on a lot and as being proclaimed as not a great defender. He's not a great defender, but he's not a bad one either. So I think you're right, I'm maybe spot in some ways where he has some value that he can provide on that side of the basketball. And it's not as always easy to take advantage of him as some people may say. Now, to the offensive X factor for Toronto, listen, I've already talked about what it is. I think it is Danny Green. and whatever minutes he gets, and that may not be very many, just because I think he kind of has to be out there to start the series. But he's got to be able to find a way to hit the shots and get back into the contributing 10 to 12 points a game, hitting 2 threes, something like that. Like he's got to give them something for this series to really have some value for Toronto wants to do ultimately. And I think on Golden State side of the basketball, I think it's going to be continued offense that Draymond Green has provided. And when I say offense, it's not just scoring; it's ability to create offense and play make as well too, which Draymond has proven he's been able to do. So without KD, without Cousins to begin the series, I think Draymond is probably the biggest X factor offensively for what Golden State is trying to do.
I completely agree with you, and I feel like Draymond Green would definitely be my offensive X factor. But I'm gonna again, I want to add a little flavor to our to our preview coverage, and in saying I'll just select somebody else. I really like this being a great opportunity for a guy like Kevon Looney, because I personally believe that next to Draymond Green, if Kevon Looney is going to continue to get the minutes, because we still don't know the certainty of DeMarcus Cousins, we don't know the certainty of Andre Iguodala, and we don't know the certainty of Kevin Durant. If all we're going on is what we see right now, Kevon Looney's momentum has put him in a situation where he can be an offensive weapon for the Warriors, not scoring the basketball, but offensive and defensive rebounding opportunities. And I think that bodes well for a team like the Toronto Raptors, who they are the type to like to make it a one and done situation. If you saw what happened in the series with the Milwaukee Bucks, the reason why the Milwaukee Bucks did not put themselves in the best position to win these last two games is because the Raptors positioned themselves to only give the Bucks one opportunity, and then that was it. So for every two opportunities the Raptors were getting, only one opportunity for the Bucks. That is a recipe for disaster. If you're the Golden State Warriors, next to turning over the basketball, that is the only decisive advantage for another team to have on a dynamic team like this. If Kevon Looney can establish his presence in rebounding the basketball, especially when there are moments when Steph Curry and Klay Thompson get to slow starts, which they have a propensity to have shown, if Kevon Looney is giving these guys additional opportunities to make shots, to opening up the floor even more because the Raptors are not back set in their defensive sets and their defensive assignments, that can bode well. He's not going to get any MVP awards for this, but we have seen that the Warriors' weakness is that they don't rebound the basketball collectively as a team well against the opposition. But sometimes you don't need that when you shoot the ball as well as the Warriors do. If the Warriors continue to get opportunity after opportunity, it will only be a matter of time before they burn the Toronto Raptors. And for Toronto Raptors, I feel like Fred VanVleet is going to have to be that guy. I know that it sounds weird saying this, but he to me is shown to be the most consistent next to Kawhi Leonard, the most consistent three-point shooter. And I don't care what you tell me. If the Toronto Raptors have any hope to beating the Golden State Warriors, they have got to shoot the three ball. They have to shoot it with confidence, and they have to shoot it without any consciousness. I'm not saying that they shoot everything with three. I'm saying that the Warriors will give them opportunities to shoot the three. They have to shoot that three. And if they're not going to get it with confidence from Danny Green, then they got to get it from the Kawhi Leonards, the Kyle Lowrys, and definitely the Fred VanVleets. They need at least three guys shooting at least 35% or better from three, or else they give themselves no opportunity to even be in this series against the Golden State Warriors.
Well, I mean, I think that is the absolute key in general for Toronto is just being able to find supplemental offense outside of Leonard, as it was in the case of the Milwaukee series as well too. So, who are the guys that step up and give them some semblance of scoring? And while we don't expect anybody to come out there and bust out the gate with a 30-point game outside of Kawhi, you got to get guys in the teens, and like Siakam has been almost nearly 20. But Lowry too, I think his offense is going to be key to this series. His ability to continue to play kind of across the board, good solid defense, getting some rebounds offensively and defensively, and penetrating and kicking and finding guys, whether that be for the open three or for mid-range jumpers or layups as well too. All these things need to happen for the Toronto Raptors to really make this series as close as some people would like to see it be, and potentially to knock off the giant that is the Golden State Warriors. So I agree 100%. I think when it comes to both sides of this, and I'm anxious to see what ends up happening throughout the course of the series. And the adjustments that are definitely going to be made, and who are heroes, who are situational heroes, for games individually as the series matriculates through, hopefully to a 7-game finale.
All right, so I'm going to ask you this question, and then we'll get right into our picks and how many games. But let me ask you this particular question: the Toronto Raptors win if they what?
They win the battle of the glass and get a lot of second chance points. I think against the Golden State defense, or was something that we always know the Golden State has a problem with. If their defense is in a way where they can continue to rotate, because there were some times, man, against Milwaukee, I was just flabbergasted. I said, Toronto is truly 5 guys on a string. They were just, there was no room, there was no space for Milwaukee to operate. And if they can do that and force Golden State into turnovers as well too, I think those are probably the 2 keys to winning for them. Defensively, turning Golden State over and winning the battle on the glass.
All right, and the Golden State Warriors win if they
Um, if they don't take Toronto lightly, really and truly, I think it's a matter of focus for them. Clearly, offensively, they're more talented team. Defensively, they can hold their own with that. So I think if they get the contributions that Draymond has been giving them the latter part of the playoffs, as I alluded to earlier, Curry continues to play at this MVP-ish type level, so to speak. Then again, they just don't need to take Toronto lightly, and they can go ahead and win this series, and it'll still be competitive and it'll still be close. But I clearly think they have the better team with a lot more to lose than Toronto has going into the series.
All right, in my opinion, Toronto Raptors win if they don't take some of the most god awful shots that I've seen over the last, two, 3 games in the course of that Eastern Conference Finals. I mean, as much as the Toronto Raptors won that series, they also got bailed out by the Milwaukee Bucks, who on many occasions have taken some even worse shots. But the shot selections that I've seen, based off of the way that they play their basketball, where they just solely defer to Kawhi Leonard, is a recipe for disaster, especially for a good team defense like the Golden State Warriors. They cannot afford to do that. There has to be ball movement, and they basically have to get the Warriors moving side to side, not just worrying about going north and south. But if they continue to shoot the basketball the way that they have shot it, that helped get them in their deficits, and that ultimately made games that look like that they should have won in regulation go into double overtimes, they are not going to win this series or even have an opportunity to win this series against the Golden State Warriors. And for the Golden State Warriors, to your point, they need to be thinking like the Bulls dynasties. They have to come in knowing that their aura of dominance is already what's being discussed. They have to play up to their shadows, basically. If the Golden State Warriors do that, they have enough players, they have enough weapons that they can overcome anything that the Toronto Raptors throw at them, even knowing that they've got Kawhi Leonard on the opposite side of that basketball court, right? But they cannot get into the pettiness. They can't get into the smallness, and they can't allow themselves. And I've said this, we do this so many times. The arrogance of their greatness can also be the platitude of their demise. If they do not lower that temperament, that they understand that as great as they can be, they also can be their own worst enemy. And they don't execute the way that Steve Kerr would expect them to execute. They don't get too big for their bridges. They should be able to dominate this series. And it would even be a worse situation, even with the possible distraction of Kevin Durant. But Kevin Durant will always be an X factor on any team because he's a mismatch nightmare for any and everybody. But again, the Warriors have proven that they can win this series without Kevin Durant. It's just that they would pad it a little bit more securely if he was on that basketball court.
Well, 100%. And you wonder, like you said, does it end up being a distraction at some point? Does Golden State feel, do they give Durant more time? So if they're up 2-0, do they, all right, well, we don't need Durant back just yet. You know what I mean? And how do you work him back? There's just so many subplots to this series that I think are intriguing and can affect the playoffs in the series one way or the other. There's a lot that goes into what's happening because of the team chemistry dynamic as well too. So I want to see what ends up happening. I want chaos. I love it. So I hope Toronto doesn't make it a long series. And forces Golden State into some hard decisions. And, I think we'll obviously get into predictions here a little bit, but there's not much question about who the better overall team is, just by virtue of them being the champion and all the things that they have and they can throw at you on both sides of the basketball. While Toronto is elite defensively, Golden State is a notch below them, just barely a notch below them. And I think in the playoffs, especially against Portland, we saw what they were able to do. So, and let's, I mean, we didn't really talk about it so much, but what if they decide, well, no, we're going to blitz Kawhi the same way they blitzed Damian Lillard? What the hell then? What then happens? Now you're forcing Lowry to make shots. You're forcing Siakam and Ibaka and those guys. They have to make shots. Norman Powell, they have to hit shots. And I think it's different sometimes when you get shots in the flow of an offense as opposed to when you get shots because the other team isn't respecting you. And I know it's a subtle difference and it shouldn't really matter. And these are NBA pros, but there's something about it. When it's like when a team flat out says, F it, go ahead, make you be the one to beat us. There's something that goes into that. So the Raptors need to be prepared for that as well, too, because that very well may be a strategy we do see. As much as we talked about Iguodala and Clay and their ability to try to defend Kawhi one-on-one, they may throw caution to the wind and say, forget that. We're going to blitz him the same way we did Dame, and look at the results that are paid for them going that way, too. So Toronto Raptors, the entire rest of the team has to be ready for that possibility going into this.
All right, Shaw, so let's get right into it, man. Who wins? How many games?
I have so many scenarios in my head, and it's just like none of them would surprise me. If Golden State won in a gentleman's sweep style, it wouldn't surprise me. I would think the games would be close, but it wouldn't shock me. I think the least likely scenario in some ways is it going 7 games with a Toronto win. So with all that said, I'm going to go with a safe pick in the middle, and I'm going to pick Golden State in 6. But I think this can go so many ways, and we can continue to see Kawhi's next level of ascension. I think we all knew what he was, and then some of us forgot based on the injury last year, but he's come back. He's come back in a major way. We may continue to see him rise against a team that he definitely does want to beat. And imagine the legacy that he could build, not only in Toronto, but bringing Toronto the first NBA championship, and then beating this behemoth and ending the dynasty of the Golden State Warriors. There's just so much folklore that can go into that. They'd be writing books about Kawhi Leonard moving forward. So in some ways, I hope it happens and Toronto gets the win. But my gut is telling me Golden State.
This I brought that particular question, that topic up, right, to bring it to this particular point in my assessment. I give the utmost respect to the Toronto Raptors. This has been a phenomenal season, and they really, in some ways, have done the unthinkable. They have blown open the conversation about who's really ready to take on the reins of winning titles out of the Eastern Conference. And that may be the bigger question that happens after this particular NBA Finals. With that being said, it ain't going to happen at the expense of the Golden State Warriors, unfortunately. The Golden State Warriors have reopened the dynamic about why this team has been so dangerous before they had Kevin Durant and even while they have Kevin Durant and while Kevin Durant is now on the sidelines, okay? And what I see from this Golden State Warriors team is what you were hoping to see from the Milwaukee Bucks, and yet it was the Raptors that figured out a way to nullify that. With that being said, the Milwaukee Bucks are not the Golden State Warriors. And unless you have Greg Popovich or Steve Kerr or some other dynamic, or Terry Stotts even, as much as I buy into Nick Nurse being a great coach, he looks to me as someone that is so heavily dependent on Kawhi Leonard that I don't think he has enough horses that he can reach into when the Warriors are ready to run their race. And that to me is a danger. With all that being said, as great as a story that this has been for the Toronto Raptors, I don't see them getting past 6 games with the Warriors. But more importantly, I don't even know if they get past 5. I really do feel like this could very well be a gentleman's sweep, assuming that Nurse does something different to nullify what we're seeing from this Golden State Warriors team. It'd have been one thing if the Golden State Warriors had played the Houston Rockets in the Western Conference Finals and got to some 6 game. The whole idea that these guys are going to be rusty game 1, I find that to be more in the case for the Toronto Raptors in game 1, given what they've had to do in order to get themselves to this point. This is nothing new for the Warriors. They play their game. They are going to take one of the games in Toronto. This isn't going to be a question of home field advantage, them being overwhelmed. It's about execution for the Warriors. And I don't know if Nick Nurse is good enough a coach to make adjustments if Steve Kerr early from game 1 has figured out a way to stymie the cyborg.
So one final note on this. Do we see KD? And if so, when do we see him during the series, do you think?
I think we see KD when the Warriors play at home. I think if the Warriors figure out a way to take a 2-0 series lead in this series, KD comes in, plays on the home court. I think the incentive for the Warriors is they want to try and see if they can keep KD, and maybe that exuberance, the fandom of him being there, it's worth the opportunity plus the extra rest. But if for any reason there's an indication that KD might be ready to go in game 2 and the Warriors lose game 1, then you would expect to see KD at game 2.
You know, I just feel like these are the highest stakes, and you're not gonna go into it, you know, and not shooting all your bullets. You want to make sure you empty the chamber, so to speak. So
yeah,
the minute Golden State
one thing is for certain, to your point though, Shaw. One thing is for certain: neither Nick Nurse nor Steve Kerr are playing the politics about what's going to happen with Kawhi or what's going to happen with Durant come after the finals. They ain't worried about that.
Very well said. You know, again, I think the outset of all this was coaching and adjustments, and we will see, you know, what team and what coach decides that, you know what, these are the adjustments I need to make, because they do have very big, lofty decisions facing these teams, even past the NBA finals. But you got to win this right now to put your team in the best position to be in the same conversation in the future. So Nurse and Kerr, they have hell of a jobs. They've done hell of a jobs to get here, and they're going to have hella jobs to kind of keep these teams on track and keep them intact past the NBA finals, no matter what the outcome is. So great conversation. I hope our fans and listeners have enjoyed this NBA Finals preview. Toronto Raptors, Golden State Warriors. And as always, we want to hear from you, man. Which team is going to take it? How many games? Who are your X factors? Offensively, defensively, the whole nine. You know, Slick Partner, we know you're listening. Holla at us on Twitter after you listen to the show. And we're excited to get this thing going, man. I'm going to be watching all the games, tweeting them live. You know, we'll have an intern on. We'll be tweeting from all the accounts, wall-to-wall NBA coverage, and I presume we'll also be doing our wrap-ups after each game as well, too, man. So I'm excited, and I can't wait to get the gunshots going, as I say.
All right. So listen, once again, you know how to get at my man Shaw, at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys jumping on board with us, riding along with us, hearing our perspective and takes. We want you to enjoy this 2019 NBA Finals between the Toronto Raptors and the Golden State Warriors. We'll catch up with you next time.